Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and we're in chapter 18 of this book titled Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This is part of our group learning program where each Sunday I'm walking you through this book to help you establish a really nice foundation and a really nice framework of the teachings of the Buddha. This book and this program lays out the teachings in a sequential order in a way that you can slowly develop a life practice that helps you move the mind to this enlightened mental state where the mind can be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. So I'd like to welcome all of you guys to our class today. This topic in chapter 18 is titled God's Creative Action. You have free will. This is where you learn about this being God, so that if you would like to have a relationship with this being, you can do that in a very healthy way. But if you're not interested in having a relationship with this God, I'm going to teach you how to do that as well. Because oftentimes, depending on what you've learned in various venues, certain things that you're thinking about related to this being God may or may not be true, and that can actually hinder you from having a very healthy relationship with this being who's available for you to actually help you and guide you on the path to enlightenment if that's what you choose. But also, if you choose to not have a relationship with this being, it can actually hinder you in terms of if you have anger or bitterness or hostility towards this being, because you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment in that way. So in today's class, what I'm going to teach you is if you would like to have a relationship with God, I'm going to teach you how to do that in a healthy way. And if you're not interested in having a relationship with God, I'm going to teach you how to do that as well so that you can still get to enlightenment regardless. Because God's not the one who determines whether you do get to enlightenment or you don't get to enlightenment, you can actually choose to have a relationship with this being or not. It's your choice. You're not required, you're not forced to have a relationship with this being at all. But if you're going to have a relationship with this being, there's certain conditioning or certain things that you might believe right now that are untrue that you're going to need to peer into and be able to see the truth on this so that you can get to a healthy relationship with this being. And if you're not interested in having a relationship with God, there's certain things you're going to need to understand there as well. So I'm here to help you to be able to do that as you would like to learn and understand. And just like everything else that I teach, it's important that you learn, you reflect, and you practice. That learning part is investigating and examining. You're not believing, you're learning, examining, investigating. And then you're reflecting to independently verify what it is that I share with you in these teachings. And then there's the practice part where you start practicing and implementing certain things that are being shared. So as we go today, you guys are welcome to ask any and all questions that you like. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. I'm going to be using some visual aids to help me explain the teachings to you on this topic. And this way, I'll be able to describe this to you in a way that's going to really help you to understand and potentially either develop a relationship with God or potentially not have a relationship with God and be able to still get to enlightenment. So the first thing I'd like to do at the beginning of our talk about this particular topic is define what I mean when I say God, because different people have different definitions of various things. And I do this with every topic pretty much. Most topics that I teach, I will define it ahead of time. Even things like meditation or mindfulness or concentration or various things that I talk about, whether it's the natural law of karma or other things, I will typically define it first so that you understand where I'm coming from and what I'm sharing on a particular topic. Your understanding of this being God may be different than what I'm describing, or your definition of this being may be different than what I'm describing. But at least if you understand the definition that I'm sharing, you'll understand what I'm teaching and where I'm coming from, so that then everything that I share, you can understand where I'm coming from with this particular topic. So the way that I define God is the creator of the universe and source of all moral authority, the supreme being. In English, we refer to this being as God, but there's other ways to refer to this being as well. Some people use the word Allah. This is the same being, just a different name. This being is all-knowing and all-powerful. This is referred to as omniscient or omnipotent, where this being has all knowledge of everything that has happened, that is happening now, and will happen long into the future. And they have significant power to do anything and everything that they would like to be able to do in this world. Now, when people oftentimes hear this particular definition, they kind of clue in on that moral authority and they try to understand what I mean by that. What I mean by that is the moral conduct or the virtuous behavior, maintaining and acting upon higher principles for proper conduct. So this moral conduct or virtuous behavior is something that the Buddha teaches in his teachings. And when you're learning things like the Eightfold Path around moral conduct or the 5 precepts, what the Buddha is teaching you there is this cause and effect, or this action and result, the results of your decisions, not this mystical, magical thing, essentially a sequence of events, that it's your life, it's your decisions, and it's your results. And you will experience whatever results that you make decisions about. So if you make wise decisions, it's going to produce wholesome results. But if you make unwise decisions, it's going to produce unwholesome results. So this moral conduct that the Buddha teaches in his actual teachings is to help you understand what it takes to be able to make wise decisions and produce wholesome results, so that you can eliminate any harm that you're causing in the world. Because if you kept causing harm based on these natural laws that exist in the world, you're going to be experiencing these unwholesome results coming back to you. So this moral conduct that the Buddha teaches is there to help you awaken to the wisdom of these natural laws. And what I'm sharing here is that God is the one who's creating all of this, that he's not creating the decisions that you make, but his moral authority is what is being described through the natural laws, that these natural laws were essentially created by God himself. The Buddha describes God in his teachings at different times, and he talks about him as the creator in some places. He talks about him as the all-knowing and all-powerful. And the Buddha even has a creation story where he talks about the creation of the world. If you go to volume 11, chapter 57 of the book series that I share, there you'll see the creation story that the Buddha shares around how the world was created. None of us were there at that time to be able to independently verify whether that's true or false, but this is what the Buddha is teaching about the creation of the world. And how the world was created at this point in our life doesn't actually really matter. The story is there, you can learn it, you can understand it, but it really doesn't matter, because right now, if your mind is experiencing any of those discontent feelings that I talk about, like sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, resentment, jealousy, stress, anxiety, or even the slightest displeasure, the mind is unenlightened and you are in existence now. And to escape this, you would need to train the mind on the path to enlightenment to get to the peace and the joy and escape the cycle of rebirth. So how the world was created and who created it really doesn't actually matter at this point. The fact is that you're in existence. Your mind is unenlightened and you need to train it. And as you do so, you'll see the peace and the joy coming into the mind. That's where the teachings of the Buddha are very unique, that it's not believe, 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 and then hope something good happens when you die. Instead, you're learning now, you're reflecting now to independently verify the teachings, and you're practicing now. So therefore, you're seeing the results now in this life. So these natural laws that the Buddha taught, he's describing the natural world around us that you can independently verify. And in my opinion, it's God who created this world, created this universe, and this is what you're actually learning. The Buddha doesn't describe it that way, but I'm describing it in that way based on what I understand about the world around us. It's important to understand that this moral conduct that the Buddha is teaching you in order to help you understand these natural laws and experience wholesome results, it's based on free will, that everything you experience in life is based on your own decisions. And you can independently verify this. Look at the hairstyle that you have. Look at the clothes that you wear. Look at where you live. Look at the fact that you choose to come to this class or listen to this replay. These are all choices that you're making. Whatever food you eat today, these are choices that you're making. It's not God that's controlling you and forcing you to do any particular thing. Even though God is the all-knowing, all-powerful being, he's not controlling you to do any particular thing. He doesn't have a destiny or fate or a plan for you. That's oftentimes what people are taught, that there's some plan that God has laid out for you, and you've got to figure out what God wants and then live that kind of life. But this is actually untrue. God understands that in order for you to feel peace and joy in this world, you need to have the freedom of choice and free will to make whatever decisions you make. And then whatever decisions you make, you experience the results of that. It's not God that's punishing you or rewarding you for anything that you're doing. It's the results of your own decisions. Even the individual Jesus Christ, who taught a lot about God and made God a central role in his teachings, even he taught the same thing. He taught you reap what you sow. So reaping what you sow is the same thing as saying that there's this cause and effect, or this action and result, that everything you experience is a result of your decisions. It's just being said in a different way. It's being said you reap what you sow. So if you lived in a world where your parents were controlling you, your life partner was controlling you, your children were controlling you, you would feel very uncomfortable in that world. And if you were living in a world that God was actually controlling you, you wouldn't feel very comfortable living in that world. So it's not that God has a plan or has a destiny or fate for you that you need to live up to that. It's not that this being wants anything from you or things for you to do. So instead, God understands, being very wise, that in order for beings to feel comfortable in this world, they need to have free will. Otherwise, we're just robots going around being controlled by God, which isn't actually true. You can see the truth in that for yourself because, as I mentioned, look at your hairstyle, look at the clothes that you're wearing, look at where you're choosing to live, look at what you're choosing to eat, look at you choosing to come learn here in this live class or through this replay. You can see that these were all choices that you made. Nobody forced you or controlled you to do this. These are free will choices that you're making. So you can independently verify that everything you experience is based on your free will. But with a lack of wisdom around moral conduct, you will make unwise decisions based in your intentions, your speech, your actions, your livelihood. And with that lack of wisdom and making unwise decisions, you'll experience unwholesome results. And this isn't God punishing you or anybody trying to teach you a lesson. This is just the natural law of Gotama that is at play, showing you where you're making unwise decisions. There's no being or entity that's controlling this natural law. So you have free will. It's not God's creative actions that are producing certain things in your life. It's your decisions. If you went around thinking that it was God that was controlling you or producing certain results in your life, you're still having that unknowing of true reality. This is like an individual trying to blame others for what they're experiencing in life. So if everything you're experiencing is based in fate or destiny or good luck or bad luck, or God is controlling you, that means you have no ability to actually improve anything in your life whatsoever. And that would be a defeating perspective. That would be a defeating misperception that would essentially take you in a direction of you not doing any work to cultivate wisdom and improve your life, because an individual has resigned themselves to believe that everything's out of their control, that it's everybody else that's causing these unwise and unwholesome things to happen in your life. But when you understand you have free will, you can get to the point where you realize if there's anything in your life that you particularly don't care for, all you need to do is cultivate wisdom, make wiser decisions, and then produce more wholesome results. If there's any part of your life that you find that is particularly unsatisfying to you, you could actually learn wisdom, make different decisions, and then produce a different result. And this is where you can see that you have the ability to move your mind to enlightenment, because the reason why the mind is unenlightened is based on decisions that you've been making in this life and previous lives. But now, through learning and practicing and training your mind, you can get to a point where you improve the condition of the mind because you have free will. You can cultivate wisdom, you can make different decisions, and you can experience different results in your life. And that's the real empowering part of understanding that God isn't controlling you, and that everything you experience as a result of your decisions is because if there's anything in your life that you particularly don't care for, you can just cultivate wisdom, make different decisions, and experience different results. And that's the beauty of understanding the natural law of Gotama and that you have free will. God doesn't grant enlightenment and determine whether you get to enlightenment or not. And this is one of the reasons why the Buddha didn't put God as a central role in his teachings, where Jesus did, because Jesus's goals were very different than the Buddha's goals. The Buddha was helping individuals learn how to get to liberation and get to this freedom of strong feelings, how to get to the peace and joy of mind through training the mind. There were various gods that were believed in during the lifetime of the Buddha, but he didn't put God as a central figure in his teachings. When the Buddha talks about the various gods, he names them based on what people understood at that time. But when he talks about the being that we refer to as God, he referred to him as Brahma, or the great Brahma. And you can see this in the teachings of the Buddha, where oftentimes people think that the Buddha rejected God or didn't teach about God, or the Buddha said that there is no God. This actually isn't true. And this is coming from an individual who hasn't necessarily studied the original teachings of the Buddha to be able to see for themselves that the Buddha actually did teach about God. And just like a Muslim might refer to God as Allah, the Buddha referred to God as Brahma, or the great Brahma. And he referred to him as the all-knowing and all-powerful. And then he describes this being at different times in his teachings. But again, he doesn't put him as a central figure in his teachings because God's not the one who determines whether you get to enlightenment or not. And also, the Buddha's goal wasn't to either prove or disprove God, which you're going to hear me talk about here in a moment. So it's through your own choices and your own decisions that's going to determine whether or not you experience enlightenment. You choosing to read books and watch videos, listen to podcasts, coming to classes, getting personal guidance from a teacher, meditating, training your mind, doing that tough work, that challenging work to train your mind. Your decisions is what's going to determine whether you actually experience enlightenment. God, nor the Buddha, nor anyone else is granting you enlightenment. It's your work, your own independent journey that's going to determine whether or not you get to enlightenment. Some things about the teachings of the Buddha around God to help you guys understand this a bit more. You can dive in and see this. The whole book series that I share, the 13 volumes, you'll see different places where in the original words of the Buddha that the Buddha is teaching about God. I'm going to share a few things with you to help you understand what I understand from these original teachings of the Buddha, because there's a lot of misunderstandings and misperceptions out there related to the teachings of the Buddha in this being God. It's important to understand that the Buddha never denied the existence of God, but instead he taught people how to attain enlightenment while still having an understanding of God. During his lifetime, there was various gods that people believed in during his lifetime. So he taught about these different gods and just kind of helped people to understand how to either have a relationship with these beings or not. He explained them as part of this entire cycle of rebirth. But then the individual or the being who's really at the center of the Buddhist teachings is you. He's teaching you what's causing the mind to be discontent. He's teaching you how to eliminate that. And he's teaching you this natural law of karma and all the other natural laws. So the reason why he's putting you at the center of his teachings is because it's you that needs to cultivate the wisdom. So while he taught about God and he explained God, this is just to help you understand this being as it relates to all the other beings in the cycle of rebirth. He also talked about Mara, which some people refer to as the devil or Satan. He even talked about heavenly beings. He talked about hell beings. He talked about animals. He talked about afflicted spirits, which are ghosts and things like this. And he talked about human beings as well. So he talked about beings in all 5 realms, including God, because he understood God's existence and he was able to explain it in a way that would help people get to enlightenment, either with a relationship with God or without. And that's what I'm going to help you do today as well. The Buddha's objective wasn't to prove or disprove God's existence. His goal was to share teachings that lead to liberation and to enlightenment. And this path to enlightenment isn't based in belief. It's based in independently verifiable truth in order for you to acquire wisdom. And by you learning, reflecting to independently verify and practice, you can see the wisdom, cultivate that wisdom, and now you can train your mind in this life to get to the peace and joy, and you can see that the mind is actually doing that. The way that the Buddha teaches, and the way that any Buddha would teach, is to provide independently verifiable evidence so that you can actually see the truth for yourself, acquire wisdom, and that's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. But this being God, the way that he functions is that he doesn't do things that are independently verifiable. If he's going to show up in your life and help you to be able to see his existence, he's going to do that with just you. But whatever he does, you can't take that thing, give it to somebody else and say, here, now you can see that God exists. There's not a way to independently verify that. Either you've had experiences to interact with this being and you know for a fact that this being exists, Or perhaps you haven't had interaction with this being, or maybe you didn't recognize the interaction that you were having, and now you don't necessarily know that this being exists or that they don't exist. So this being God doesn't do things in a way that can provide you independently verifiable proof that he exists. So a Buddha is only going to be providing teachings that are independently verifiable, and that's one of the reasons why he didn't provide evidence to either prove or disprove God's existence, but he did talk about this being. So God will oftentimes show up in an individual's life if they're open to this relationship. And again, it's not something that you have to have or you're required to have to get to enlightenment, but it's something that can be beneficial for you if that's what you choose to do. But you can also get to enlightenment without a relationship with God as well, and that's possible. As you hear me talk here about God, you might hear me use the pronoun he, and all of my interactions with this being have been very strong, very powerful, and I describe it as a masculine energy, so that's why I use the pronoun he when I refer to God. Even the Buddha himself, when he talked about God, he referred to him as a male gender, and he shared that this being is a male. And that's been my experience as well, that I can independently confirm. But if you think of God as either a different gender or maybe a non-gender whatsoever, you can think about God in that way. But just understand that when I talk about God, I will refer to him as a he using the masculine pronoun. But that doesn't mean that's the way that you need to talk about this being. So I thought I would share that with you as we get going in our class, because you'll occasionally hear me refer to God as a he. Gotama Buddha focused practitioners' minds on establishing right view, because this is what's going to help you get to liberation and understanding the natural law of karma. What right view is, for those of you guys that have studied with me, you probably already know this, but anybody who's joining me recently, you might not understand what right view is. So I'll just give you a little recap. What right view is to understand the Four Noble Truths, understanding what is the problem in the unenlightened mind, which is discontentedness, those pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant, those conditioned feelings. It's understanding the cause of those feelings, which is craving, desire, attachment, which you need to peer into and understand very deeply how the mind is longing, yearning, and craving permanence. And then understanding the elimination of discontentedness is to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. And understanding that the path forward to completely eliminate your discontentedness is the Eightfold Path. If you penetrate into the Four Noble Truths, what you come to as you're establishing right view is that your mind is causing your own discontent feelings. What the unenlightened mind typically does with a lack of wisdom is it wants to blame other people for the discontent feelings that you're experiencing. And any kind of anger or sadness or frustration or any other difficult feelings that you're dealing with, you might blame other people. This would be wrong view. And if you have wrong view, what you might do is you might push people out of your life, or you might push a situation out of your life. But that doesn't solve the problem, because you keep getting angry or frustrated or irritated about something else. It's only a matter of time. With wrong view, not only do you push people away, but you might be bitter and harsh and hostile towards people, misunderstanding what the real problem is, thinking that the problem is external, and now you might be feeling justified in your anger, your hostility, and your bitterness towards others. Or the third thing that the mind will do with wrong view is put your expectations on other people, trying to control them and get them to do things your way. So with the wrong view, the mind is falsely understanding what the problem is, thinking that these feelings are occurring based on something external or outside of your own mind. And now you have certain unskillful conduct of either pushing people away, being bitter, harsh, and hostile, and putting your expectations on people. And now people might choose to leave out of your life. And the number of people that you can spend time with becomes fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer. But when you establish right view, what you understand is that your mind is causing these discontent feelings itself, and you can train your mind in order to get to liberation and get to freedom where you no longer have those strong feelings. So the Buddha focused you on understanding what is actually causing these discontent feelings by establishing right view, accepting responsibility and accepting accountability for anything and everything that's occurring in your life. Because not only are those discontent feelings being caused by your own mind, but anything unwholesome that is occurring in your life, this is all a result of your decisions. And this is where this can be very empowering, as I said before, because anything that you find to be something that you don't care for in your life, you can just cultivate wisdom, make different decisions, and experience a different result. But if you stay in wrong view and you blame other people, or maybe in some cases blaming God for what it is that you're experiencing, then you have no ability to actually improve your life. So establishing right view is utterly important. And the Buddha started students there at the very beginning, starting with right view. And that's where I will typically start brand new students too, is helping them establish right view. And then he helped students to understand this natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result, the results of your decisions. This is what you're actually awakening to. When we talk about awakening to enlightenment or awakening to the wisdom of the Buddha or getting to wisdom, what you're really cultivating is the wisdom of this natural law of cause and effect, or action and result. Just like with the natural law of gravity, you struggled with that throughout your life when you were earlier in life and you fell down, you hit your head, you broke toys. Slowly but surely, you gained wisdom of the natural law of gravity, and then you made wiser decisions that produced wholesome results. And now you don't struggle with that natural law anymore because you fully awoke to it. Well, the same struggles and difficulties that you had with the natural law of gravity are happening with this natural law of karma, that when you're angry and bitter and harsh and hostile and you're experiencing unwholesome results in your life, this is just because of your lack of wisdom. You're not necessarily a bad person or anything like that. I wouldn't suggest that you think that way, because it can be very diminishing and degrading. But instead, just realize that you have a lack of wisdom of this natural law. And if you cultivate wisdom around this natural law, you can then make wiser decisions that produce wholesome results, where ultimately, by the time you get to enlightenment, all your relationships will be at ease. You'll be polite, kind, friendly, respectful to anybody and everybody around you. Right now, there might be certain people in your life that you like and certain people that you don't like, that you have dislike for certain people. And this is what the unenlightened mind does. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't even have the slightest dislike towards any being whatsoever. You can just love all beings unconditionally. And this comes from learning and training the mind on this natural law of karma, of cause and effect, through the Eightfold Path. So what you're experiencing in life and how to get to liberation is based on establishing right view and then understanding this natural law of karma, among other things that you need to understand. It's not based in God's creative actions, because you have free will. And the Buddha makes this very clear in this teaching that I'll share with you, where the Buddha is teaching about God. As I mentioned in his original teachings, you'll see many places where he's actually sharing teachings about God. And this is just one of those places. And I'm sharing this with you so that you can see that the Buddha indeed did teach about God. And each time that I'm sharing teachings from the Buddha, you can see that I typically share the reference. You can see here there's a reference AN 3.61. This goes back to the original source teachings of the Buddha, which are in 45 large volumes of books. So each time that you see me sharing teachings, whether it's in books or other written form, I will typically have this reference for you to go back and be able to verify for yourself that this is indeed the original words of the Buddha from the Pali Canon. This is a place where he's mentioning God and referencing God. Here, he's illustrating that you have free will. That's what he's ultimately teaching you. And I'm going to walk you through this teaching so that you can understand it and apply it to your own life. But you'll see other places in the book series and other things that I share where the Buddha is teaching about God as well. And you'll see the reference there that you can go back and verify it for yourself. So if you see somebody say that the Buddha rejected God or the Buddha never taught about God, you can see that that's 100% not true. And you can independently verify that for yourself by going back to independently confirm that this is coming from his original teachings. So this particular teaching here, this one is titled, All is Caused by God's Creative Action. And this is kind of like a contradiction in the title, because everything is not caused by God's creative action. But this is kind of like a contradiction in the title to help illustrate a point. Here, the Buddha is actually talking to individuals that he's coming in contact with, that you might think during the lifetime of the Buddha that everybody must have been studying with the Buddha, right? But this isn't actually true. During the lifetime of the Buddha, not everybody understood that he was a Buddha. It's not like you get to enlightenment and then there's like a turn of the ear, or like the nose is turned a certain way and then everybody knows that that person's a Buddha. A Buddha is an individual who's gotten to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. Then they will dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their teachings, helping countless people get to enlightenment during their lifetime. Then they will preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people can get to enlightenment after their death. So these are the main three criteria that make a Buddha a Buddha. They get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They dedicate the rest of their life to helping people get to enlightenment, and countless people get to enlightenment during their lifetime. And then they preserve their teachings so countless more people can get to enlightenment after their death. So we know that today the Buddha is the Buddha. But during his lifetime, not everybody knew that he was a Buddha because all three of those criteria hadn't been met. And not everybody knew and understood what a Buddha is. So you might think that everybody is actually learning with the Buddha, but he didn't go around performing a bunch of miracles to convince people that he was a Buddha. A Buddha actually doesn't do that intentionally because it helps them that people don't know that they're an actual Buddha. So a Buddha is not going to go out publicly and proclaim that they're a Buddha, and then the entire community wherever they live is going to come learn with them. It's actually much better that people don't know that this person's an actual Buddha. So the Buddha would come in contact with other teachers who were claiming that it was their teachings that led to enlightenment. He would come in contact with other students, people who were learning with other teachers, and sometimes he would have conversations with them while they were eating or while they were talking or walking or what have you. He would have a conversation with them. So this is a documentation of a conversation that he was having with other people who were on the path to enlightenment, but they were studying with other teachers that their teachings don't lead to enlightenment. And he was talking with certain Brahmin, which are Hindu priests. So here, this is saying, then monks, I approach those ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine in view as this. Whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by God's creative activity. And I said to them, is it true that you venerable ones hold such a doctrine in view? When I asked them this, they affirm it. So the Buddha basically went to these other people who were claiming to be on the path to enlightenment, ascetics, and these are people who have given up worldly possessions, to Brahmin, who are Hindu priests, and he says, hey, all those pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant that you experience, are those caused by God's creative activity? Meaning your happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, your sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, those feelings of displeasure and uncomfortableness, is that all caused by God's creative activity? And they affirm it. When he asked them this, yes, they affirm it. So then the Buddha goes on, then I say to them, in such a case, is it due to God's creative activity that you might destroy life, take what is not given, indulge in sexual activity, speak falsehood, produce argumentative speech, speak harshly, indulge in idle chatter, that you might be full of longing, have a mind of ill will, and hold wrong view? So he's asking them, hey, if you think that God's the one who's causing all those discontent feelings in your mind, is it also because of God that you're killing, that you're stealing, that you're indulging in sexual activity, that you're lying, that you're speaking argumentatively, that you're speaking harshly, that you have idle chatter or frivolous speech, that you're full of this longing, this craving, this desire, this attachment, that your mind is full of ill will, which is anger, hatred, frustration, agitation, and that you hold wrong view, meaning that you have this unknowing of true reality or this ignorance? The Buddha is saying, is it God that caused all of that in your mind? And then he says, those who fall back on God's creative activity as the essential truth have no interest to do what should be done, or to avoid doing what should not be done, nor do they make an effort in this respect. What he's saying is that if you're blaming God for all the feelings that you experience, and if you're blaming God for all the things that you're experiencing in terms of you killing and stealing and speaking lies and all these other things, that you're being argumentative and speaking harshly, if you're blaming God for those things, then you have no interest to improve your life. You have no interest to cultivate wisdom and do wise things that are going to produce wholesome results. You're not making an effort to actually learn and develop your mind and cultivate wisdom. You're just blaming God for the things that you're experiencing. So then the Buddha goes on. Since they do not apprehend as true and valid anything that should be done or should not be done, they are muddle-minded. They do not guard themselves. And even the personal designation aesthetic could not be legitimately applied to them. So here the Buddha is saying that because you're not willing to do what's done, because these beings are not cultivating their wisdom, their mind is muddled. What this means is lacking concentration. That when you have pollution of your mind, those 10 fetters that the Buddha teaches, your mind will lack concentration. You'll find that you'll have difficulties focusing, that you'll have difficulties with memory and things like this. But when you clear out your mind of all that pollution, you can be focused and concentrated. You can have clarity of mind and deep memory. So an individual whose mind has full of longing, which is craving, that has anger or this ill will, and has this wrong view or this ignorance, their mind is polluted. So the Buddha is saying, hey, these beings that are blaming God for what they're experiencing, their mind is muddled, that they're lacking concentration, they're lacking focus, that they don't guard themselves. What the guard is whenever the Buddha is talking about guard, he's talking about mindfulness. That you need to have this awareness of the mind. That's what's going to help you transform the mind to enlightenment, away from these pollutions into enlightenment. Because if you're guarding the mind with awareness of mind, wherever you see any kind of pollution or frustration or agitation or any kind of unwholesome qualities arising, you can cut that off and let it go and eliminate it from the mind. So if an individual's mind is lacking concentration, they may not be guarding themselves with mindfulness. They might not be guarding the mind. And then he says, even the personal designation aesthetic could not be legitimately applied to them. If an individual is an ascetic during the lifetime of the Buddha, or even now, they would be on the path to enlightenment. You can be on the path to enlightenment without being an ascetic. What an ascetic is someone who's given up worldly life and they've gone into homelessness. They're essentially ordained in order to become enlightened. But a household practitioner can get to enlightenment too, and they're not an ascetic. But the Buddha was talking to ascetics at this point. And if you're an ascetic, you've left home and now you're on the path to enlightenment. And what the Buddha is saying is that if you're blaming God for all the things that you experience, you could basically conclude that you're not even on the path to enlightenment because you haven't cultivated a right view, which would be that everything you experience based on what's going on in your mind is based on your mind itself. It's not based on God. So here the Buddha is basically helping you see that you have free will, that God isn't controlling you and telling you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. God's not forcing you to do anything. What you experience in your life is a result of your decisions, not based on God's decisions. And he's saying somebody who doesn't understand that, they're not even yet on the path to enlightenment because they're still blaming another being for what they experience in their life. And this is what the unenlightened mind tends to do. So if this is where you're at in your practice, it's okay, that's where you're at, but slowly but surely start to look at your life and realize that everything you experience is a result of your decisions, not actually God. And the Buddha here is sharing that with the individuals that he's interacting with. So some other things that the Buddha is teaching around this topic of God that is very helpful for you to be able to see the truth and penetrate into this is the Buddha's undeclared teachings. He has certain teachings that he declared because he taught for 45 years. And this is why his teachings are so vast and so comprehensive, that you've got 45 large volumes of books. I actually have one right here next to me, this very large volume of book that is the teachings of the Buddha. This is book 11 out of the entire series. And he declared an extensive amount of teachings to be able to help you see the truth and that you can then independently verify. And at different times in his teachings, he will remind his students. He will say, remember, students, what have I taught? I taught this. And what he says is he points to the Four Noble Truths. He says, I taught discontentedness. I taught the cause of discontentedness. I taught the elimination of discontentedness. I taught the path to eliminating discontentedness. Basically, what he taught is how to get to enlightenment and how to liberate the mind from these strong feelings. He says, remember, this is what I taught. And then there's points where he says, and remember what I did not teach. I did not teach these things. And these are the things that he didn't teach. He didn't teach whether the world is eternal or whether the world is not eternal. He didn't teach whether the world is finite or it's infinite. He didn't teach whether the soul is the same as the body or the soul is one thing and the body is another. He just left it as an undeclared teaching. He never taught whether there is a soul or there isn't a soul. And then after death, the Tathagata exists. After death, the Tathagata does not exist. After death, the Tathagata both exists and does not exist. And after death, the Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist. What a Tathagata is it's a Buddha. A Tathagata, the way that this word translates, is one who's discovered the truth or one who shares the truth. So he's referring to himself here. And what he's saying is, after death, I'm not telling you whether I exist, whether I don't exist, whether I both exist and do not exist, or whether I neither exist nor do not exist. He just left it as an undeclared teaching. A Tathagata, a Buddha, is an enlightened being. So essentially what he's sharing with you is when you get to enlightenment, he's not declaring what happens next. Sometimes people will tell you that when you get to enlightenment, you don't exist any longer. Or you something else. They might say, oh, you go to this other world and you do this or that or the other thing. But you can see in the original words of the Buddha, which I have throughout this entire book series, where he doesn't declare any of these things. And remember, when a Buddha is teaching, they're providing independently verifiable evidence that you can then verify for yourself and see the truth. So he doesn't have any independently verifiable evidence to prove whether the world is eternal or non-eternal, whether it's finite or infinite, whether the soul actually exists or whether it doesn't exist, or what happens to an enlightened being afterwards. And there's various reasons why I think the Buddha left this as an undeclared teaching in terms of what happens after enlightenment. Either he had never experienced it, so therefore he didn't know what actually came next, because a Buddha only teaches things that they've actually experienced. So either he had never experienced it because he had never been enlightened and actually died before. He never had that experience, so he didn't teach it for that reason. Or there is the ability for a Buddha to know things before they actually occur. So if he did know what was next, and let's just say that there's something way, 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 way better than enlightenment that is experienced next. Well, if he described what that is, that's just one more thing for you to eliminate your craving, desire, attachment to. So he wisely didn't teach it. And if there isn't something next, okay, then he didn't teach that. He didn't describe what's next. So he didn't say whether there is something next or there isn't something next. But by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind is so peaceful and so joyful in the present moment, you're not going to care what's next. So the teachings of the Buddha aren't about believing a whole bunch of things, and then when you die, there's some great thing that happens when you die. That's not what the teachings of the Buddha are about. It's about learning now, reflecting now to independently verify, practicing now to uproot the pollution out of the mind and experience the results now. Oftentimes the mind wants to be in the past or it wants to be in the future. This is what the unenlightened mind does. But by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind is in the present moment. Your mind's completely content, completely peaceful, completely joyful. There's nothing that your mind's longing for. You're not longing for an afterlife. So by the Buddha not teaching what may or may not be next, this is a way to help you eliminate any craving or any clinging to anything that may or may not be in the future. So he wisely didn't teach anything. Whether there is or isn't something after this, that's yet to be determined. You can figure that out once you get to enlightenment. You'll figure it out then. But the goal is to get to enlightenment. And if you have a craving and a longing, a yearning for something in the future after this life, you're not going to actually be able to get to liberation. You're going to just stay stuck in this cycle of rebirth. So you're going to need to get to the point where you don't have this longing, yearning for what may or may not come next. So these are some teachings of the Buddha around this topic that you might have been exposed to related to God. But now let's use these teachings of the Buddha to be able to help you understand how to practice in such a way that you can get to enlightenment and actually maintain a relationship with God. But it may mean that you need to understand things and clear out certain things that you've been taught and believed in the past. And then after this, I will teach you how to have a relationship with this being of God where you don't have a relationship with God, where you can still get to enlightenment and not actually have that relationship. So here, what I'm sharing with you is how you can actually have a relationship with God, where understanding that You're not required to have a relationship with God in order to get to enlightenment, but having a relationship with God won't hinder you either if you understand the things that I'm going to teach you and you practice this way. Some people will tell you that having a relationship with God would hinder you in getting to enlightenment, but that's because they're not understanding how to practice in such a way where you can maintain a relationship with God and actually still get to enlightenment. So the first thing to understand is that you're going to need to establish right view. And that's usually the first thing that I'm helping students to do when they first start learning with me, is understanding the problem is discontentedness. The cause of that is craving, desire, attachment. The elimination of that is to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. And the path forward is the Eightfold Path. Whereas if you believed that what you experience is a result of God, then you can't get to enlightenment, because why would you ever cultivate wisdom in order to improve the condition of your mind and improve your life if everything you experience is a result of God? So by you understanding and practicing right view, which is found in the Four Noble Truths, the very first step of the Eightfold Path, you can accept responsibility and accountability for anything that you experience in life. No longer blaming God for the things that you experience, but also no longer necessarily attributing the positive things that you're experiencing in life to God either. That anything that you choose to experience in life, it's a result of your decisions. If you have food to eat today, that's a result of your decisions. It's not God that gave you that food. If you have clothes to wear today, that's a result of your decisions. If you have a house to live in, if you have a car, if you have a job, if you have money in your bank account, this is the cause and effect of your decisions, not God. So having right view, you can see anything wholesome that you're experiencing, it's based on your wise decisions. And anything unwholesome that you're experiencing is based in your unwise decisions. This is part of establishing right view. You're going to need to eliminate any craving in the mind as it relates to God. Sometimes people are taught to pray to God and ask for things from God, almost like a genie in a bottle. And if this is what you're doing, it's understandable. This is where you are. You're not a bad person. But oftentimes this is what people are taught, that you can pray to God and just ask for things, and then they're going to appear in your life. Well, if you do this and you practice in this way, if you get what you want, if you get your cravings fulfilled, you'll get happy and excited and elated. But if you don't get what you want, your mind will get angry and frustrated and agitated, and you will attribute those feelings to God. And now when you're experiencing those painful feelings, you'll push God away. You'll push God out of your life, or you'll be bitter and harsh and hostile, or you might put your expectations on God. So praying to God and asking for stuff, this isn't how the world works. Anything that you experience is a result of your decisions, not God. So if your family was in the hospital and they're been injured or they're sick, and you sat down and you prayed and prayed and prayed and wanted God to heal your parents or your siblings or some other person that's close to you, and if your family member comes out of the hospital healed, you might think that God did that. But in reality, what truly happened is the doctors administered certain medicines and care, and because of this cause and effect and action and result, this person was healed. But if that person dies, for example, and you're sitting there praying and pleading with God to heal this person, and this person dies, you might actually think that God's the one who did that and push God away. If you think God's the one who chooses whether people live or whether people die, when people die in your life, you might be very angry at God because your cravings aren't getting fulfilled. And this might cause you to push God away. So it's important that you don't treat God like a genie in a bottle if you're going to do prayer. That what you might decide to do is you might talk to God in a conversation. You might tell God that you believe in him. You might tell God that you're open to his guidance. You might give thanks for God to be part of your life. This is all ways that you can pray. And it might change how you do your prayer. And that's potentially a very good thing, because if you're sitting down asking for a bunch of things, this is just your craving, your desire, your attachment. So just like I share with you, don't believe what other people say about these topics and that this prayer of God being a genie in the bottle is untrue. Don't believe me either, right? You can test this for yourself. You could put your hands together right now and you could pray, or you could plead with God to give you $1 million, or to give you a bigger house, or to give you a better job or better friends, or all these other things, maybe a nicer car, and see if it happens. it's not going to happen. He's not a genie in a bottle, right? But you could test it for yourself and see if, a pot of gold magically appears at your feet. And there's the proof for you that that's not how things work in the world. Whether you would like new friends, a new job, a nicer house, a nicer car, more money in your bank account, this is a result of your decisions, not God. So God can actually guide you on this path, but he doesn't just show up in your life and push you aside and force you to do things and control you. And you can't kind of push a button and say, okay, God, I'm ready for your advice now. What would you like to teach me? Right? What you need to do is develop a relationship with God, just like you would develop the relationship with a neighbor or a friend or a coworker. And then as God feels like it's wise to do so and it's appropriate, God might share guidance with you. And he does this through your own mind. It's almost like fatherly advice or grandfatherly advice, where you're kind of uncovering certain information that are going to help you in life. And it didn't come from you. It didn't come from anyone else around you. It's from your own mind. But when this is occurring, you need to actually learn, reflect, independently verify, and practice. If you get some kind of fatherly advice in the mind, it doesn't mean you need to rush out and go do that thing right now, because God's not trying to force you or control you to do any particular thing. He's giving you advice. He's giving you a suggestion. It's your independent journey to enlightenment. You're going to need to take whatever that information is, and you're going to need to learn it. You're going to need to reflect on it to verify whether it's true or false. And then you're going to need to practice and see if it actually works in your life. Because God's not here to control you or dictate or force you to do any particular thing. But God can actually guide you, but it's not based on your request and your pleading and begging for him to do this. He will just do it kind of naturally at different times where he feels it's appropriate. But you're going to need to still be on this independent journey to cultivate the wisdom and figure out whether this information that has come to you is actually beneficial for you and helping you in your life. Because there's other beings out there that can influence you as well, not just God, but there's other beings too. So you're going to need to still look at, just like when you talk to a friend or a family member and you reflect on what it is that they share and whether or not it would be wise for your life or not, you're going to need to do that with this being as well. So you can pray and you can let God know that you believe in him, or that you know that he exists, that you're open to his guidance, and give him thanks for being part of your life. And then he may show up in your life at different times and kind of help you along this journey. But you shouldn't have expectations that he's going to do that, or crave or long or yearn for him to do that, but just know that he will. He's going to provide you information within your own mind, but then it's your decisions that's going to produce any results. He's not going to, give you more money. He's not going to give you new friends. He's not going to, give you a boyfriend or a girlfriend. You've got to make all those decisions for yourself. It's just fatherly advice. And it's not something that you're forced to do or you're required to do. It's just guidance that would be able to help you if you choose to learn it, reflect on it, and practice to make wise decisions. If you have a craving to be with God in heaven, and that's what you've been taught, that after this life, you're going to die and you're going to permanently be with God in heaven, this is a craving, desire, attachment that you're going to need to let go of. Because if you've studied the universal truths and you understand the universal truth of impermanence, then you've come to the understanding that the heavenly realm is not permanent. It's not a permanent existence. So if you have a longing, yearning to reside in heaven with God permanently, there's still a craving, there's still a desire there. Your mind hasn't fully let go, being in the present moment, being peaceful and joyful in the present moment. The mind's still longing, yearning for this afterlife. And you need to be able to eliminate that in order to train the mind to be peaceful and joyful in the present moment. So if you have any attachment to God whatsoever, wanting anything for God, wanting God to be a certain way, anything whatsoever, you're going to need to eliminate that. Because as long as you have that craving and longing and yearning, the mind is still holding on. So you'll need to learn how to love without attachment. You're going to need to learn how to have unconditional love, where you're practicing this potentially in your life with your family and your friends and learning how to do that. But you're going to need to learn how to do that with this being too, that you're not craving and desiring, expecting, wanting things from this being. So these are some things that you're going to need to learn. In addition to that, you're going to need to understand this natural law of Gotama, which is what I've been teaching you all throughout this program. And we've even been touching on it a little bit here, to understand this natural law of cause and effect, and that what you're experiencing in life is not from God. If you've been taught to fear God, you're going to need to learn to eliminate that. Because if you're going to cultivate a healthy relationship with a being, if you walk around with fear, this isn't a healthy relationship. If you have fear of your parents, if you have fear of your life partner, if you have fear of your boss, if you have fear of other beings in your life, this isn't going to promote a healthy relationship in your life, because there's certain cravings in there, and now there's certain fear. While this being God has all knowledge and has all power to do anything and everything, this being is wise enough not to wield that power in unwholesome ways. So oftentimes people are taught to fear God, and this is the reason why you should do wholesome things, is because out of this fear of God punishing you. And if this is the way you've been taught, you might even find yourself in a situation where you're punishing the people around you, maybe like friends or family or children. You might think that, okay, I need to judge my children and I need to punish them. And this is the way to get them to do something that is wise. But this actually doesn't promote wise decision making at all. An individual will only do those things as long as that fear is in place. As soon as that fear is gone, maybe your children move out of your house, that fear is removed. So now they're going to do unwise things. So an individual will only do things out of fear as long as the pressure and the fear is there. And that fear isn't permanent. So they haven't actually cultivated wisdom to make wise decisions. So God doesn't use fear in order to convince people to do things. That's not the way that this being functions. He understands you have free will, and you need to cultivate your wisdom in order to make wise decisions. So if people have taught you to fear God and God's wrath and God's power and all these things, this is a very unwise way and a very unhealthy way to have a relationship with anybody, including this being God. So you're going to need to let go of this fear by seeing the truth that everything you experience is a result of your decisions. That when you're experiencing unwholesome things, it's not God punishing you. If you think God is punishing you, as I mentioned, you might be punishing other people, or you might have a certain fear of this being. But if you can see the true reality that what you're experiencing is a result of your decisions, and you can see that this being God hasn't controlled you at all, you're the one that chose to wear these clothes, you're the one that chose to show up to this class, you're the one that chose to have a certain hairstyle, you're the one who chose your job, you're the one who chose your life partner or to not have a life partner, you're the one who chose to have children or not have children. These are all choices that you're making. God doesn't want anything from you. So if you walk around with this fear and this wanting and thinking that God is punishing you, then this fear is going to get in the way of you having a very loving relationship with this being, because you might think that this fear is coming from God, when in reality it's coming from your own mind and certain cravings and certain conditioning where people have taught you to believe that you should fear God. But I would encourage you to never fear anything, including God, because that's not going to promote a healthy relationship. So as I share this with people, sometimes students say, well, if I shouldn't fear God and God's not controlling me and I'm not praying to God, asking him to give me things, then what's the purpose of God? Why should I even have a relationship with God? Why is God even in existence, right? Because if you've been taught to pray to God and he's going to give you things, perform miracles, and he's going to fear you into doing certain things, and he punishes you and rewarding you, you might be at the point where it's like, well, I don't even know if I understand God anymore, because everything that I've learned about God, David, you're trying to share with me that this is untrue. And potentially, maybe, yeah, depending on what you've learned about God. Everybody's been exposed to this being in different ways. Well, if you're looking to understand God, what I would share with you is that God's a practitioner of these teachings, that these natural laws, God understands them inside and out. And just like your mind can get to the peace and the calm, the serenity, the contentedness and the joy, just like your mind can get to a point where you love all beings unconditionally and you don't have any expectations of others, God's mind's already doing that, right? God loves everyone unconditionally. Sometimes people are taught that God hates certain people, or he wants people to do one thing or another. You know, if you have a certain sexual orientation, people might say that he hates you. Or if you come from some ethnicity or you do one action or another, that God hates you. This isn't actually true. God loves all beings. He doesn't even have the slightest dislike towards any beings whatsoever. He's not trying to control you or put your expectations on you. He's not jealous of you. right? Sometimes people are taught that God has jealousy and that if you do one thing or another, he's going to be jealous of you. He's not jealous of you because he's not attached to you. He's not trying to control you to be any particular way. It's not God's responsibility to restrain you. Some people think that because God is all-knowing and all-powerful, that if there's murders or rapes in the world, that this is God who's creating this. And how could this loving God produce murders and rapes in the world? Well, it's not God who's doing the murdering. It's not God who's doing the raping. It's other people that are choosing to do that through their craving, their anger, and their ignorance, their unknowing of true reality, those three poisons. So God isn't attached to us wanting us to be any particular way. He's not longing and yearning. And he's not responsible to restrain us. Even though God has the power to snap his fingers and instantly everything can be a certain way, God doesn't do that. He's not going to snap his fingers and instantly create a perfect world. Because even if he did this, say he snapped his fingers and instantly every single human being was enlightened and now they are doing things perfectly. Well, because of their lack of wisdom, of not understanding the natural laws, within a matter of seconds, human beings would be right back into the same problems again. Because people would be raping and murdering and beating people up and yelling and hollering and being argumentative and bitter and harsh and hostile. So even though God may have the power to snap his fingers and instantly create that kind of thing, he wouldn't do that because human beings haven't cultivated the wisdom to understand how to do that on their own. In order for the world to become more peaceful and a more loving and kind place to exist, individuals need to cultivate wisdom to be able to make wise decisions that produces wholesome results. So God's responsibility isn't to restrain us from evil. Whatever you experience is a result of your decisions, not what God's choosing to do. So sometimes people think that God's responsibility is to restrain us from evil, that if God was truly all-powerful, he wouldn't let this person get murdered, or he wouldn't let this person be raped, or any other unwholesome thing that's occurring. But anything that's occurring is based on these individual decisions, based in free will of each individual decision that an individual is making. If God controlled us and he restrained us from doing certain things, you wouldn't be interested in living in that world because you wouldn't have free will. Somebody's controlling you. So God's not attached to us and wanting us to be a certain way. And he's not responsible for restraining us from certain evil things that an individual might do. It's up to each individual to choose to function through wisdom and make wise decisions. So while God's job isn't to restrain us, and he's not responsible to do that, he is interested in seeing all beings live in harmony. But they need to do that through acquiring wisdom to make wise decisions. But God's not attached or craving or longing, yearning for that to occur. Whatever we experience here in this world, it's based on our decisions. It's not based on what God's choosing to do or not do. It's based on our decisions. So just like a wise parent, if a child went over and touched a hot stove, you could sit there and try to keep restraining your child all day, and you could keep restraining them and restraining them and restraining them. They're going to keep going over to that hot stove. Sometimes what you need to do is let the child touch the hot stove. They cultivate the wisdom, ooh, that hurts, and then they will no longer touch the stove. So rather than God constantly restraining us and never cultivating wisdom, he's going to let us do whatever it is that we choose to do. That's our own free will. But we're functioning through either a wisdom or a lack thereof, and then we're experiencing the results of that, which is based in the natural law of karma. So this is some ways to understand God, that he loves you, that he cares about you, that he would like to see nothing but goodness happen for you. But that's a result of your decisions, not a result of his decisions. And by you cultivating wisdom, this is what will actually help you to be able to make wise decisions, produce wholesome results, and then ultimately you can have this wholesome relationship, this very healthy relationship with God if that's what you choose. But just like you have certain neighbors in your community, and you might choose to have a relationship with certain neighbors, and you may choose not to have certain relationships with certain neighbors, that's completely fine. The same thing is true with God, that you can choose to have a relationship with him or not. You may not be interested in having a relationship with God whatsoever, and that's fine. I'm going to teach you right now about how to do that. But if you would like to have a relationship with God, this is how you can develop a healthy relationship with him. Now, if you're not interested in having a relationship with God, you're going to at least need to get to the point where you don't have any anger, hatred, or ill will, or any kind of hostility towards this being of God whatsoever. Sometimes, depending on what you've been taught, you might have this anger, this hostility, or this bitterness towards this being. If you've been praying for people to be well and to be healthy, and those people died, you might think that God took these people away from you, and you might now have this bitterness and hostility and animosity towards God. And if that's the case, you're not going to be able to get to liberation of your mind. You need to get rid of all anger, all hatred, all ill will related to any being whatsoever. You're not going to be able to keep your anger towards God kind of like compartmentalized here just for God, kind of like separated and only towards God. If you have anger in the mind, if you have anger in the mind for God, in other situations, that anger is going to bubble up. You can't just keep it trapped only for this being, because you still have anger and bitterness in your mind. Your mind's not liberated from that yet. So if you're going to choose to not have a relationship with God, you're going to need to cultivate this loving kindness, which is this active goodwill, or this genuine interest in seeing all beings be well, including God. And for those of you guys that have been learning with me, things like loving kindness meditation, if you have anger and hatred towards God, or frustration or agitation towards this being, you might need to include this being in your loving kindness meditation so that you can have a more healthy relationship. So you've learned how to do this with other beings that I've taught through loving kindness meditation. You might need to do that here as well. If you have any kind of animosity or resentfulness towards this being, in order to get to the point where you can have a healthy relationship, if that's what you choose. But if you choose not to have a relationship with this being, but you still have this anger and hatred in the mind, you're going to need to do this in order to release that out of the mind, and at least get to the point where maybe you don't have a relationship with God, but you at least don't have anger, hatred, and ill will towards this being. So this is everything that I have to share with you guys on this topic. I just decided to teach all the way through, giving you guys the full understanding of what I have to share with you. And then I'm going to open up now to any and all questions that you guys have related to what I've been sharing. You can put this into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, or you can raise your hand electronically and ask any and all questions that you like about anything that I've been describing, or anything that you've learned other places about this being too. You can share that, and I can help you reflect on it and understand how to get to a healthy relationship with God, or how to not have a relationship at all with God, whatever it is that you choose. I see Chrissy has her hand up. If you'd like to ask your questions, Chrissy, you're welcome to.
Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay, good. I'm interested in your opinion and your thoughts on a new analogy, I guess, of looking at God that I heard recently. It was that the being God, it is in all of us, and therefore all of us, in a sense, are our own God, and we create our own destiny, which, as you know, this is a different way of looking at things for me, because I was brought up like God creates our destiny. He knows what's going to happen. It's like all like made out for me. My life was already determined, and I'm just living it out. That's how I thought life was until meeting you and working with you and understanding a bit more of true reality. But then hearing that perception of God being in us, therefore, in a sense, we are God too. We create our own destiny. I'm like, well, maybe if God created karma and we're doing and making these choices, maybe I could see that as being partly true. But I'm curious as to your input on that.
Sure. Pleased to share my thoughts. So while God knows everything that's going to occur for the rest of time, and he knows everything from the past and the present and the future, he's not the one who's creating that. He has the knowledge and he has the wisdom of what will occur, but he's not laid that out. He's not produced that. He's just understanding all the individual decisions that every single being is going to be making from now until the end of time, if there is an end of time, since the Buddha didn't teach whether there is or isn't an end of time. So he understands that, and he has that wisdom, he has that knowledge, but he's not the one who's decided that. He just has the wisdom of what will occur, but it's just the cause and effect that is producing that. It's our own individual decisions that's producing that. In my opinion, if an individual has the thought that they are God, this is coming from one's mind's own ego, because this being is their own being, and we are this own being. We are a human being, but we aren't a God. We are a human being. A God is a formless being, and God isn't born through the womb of a woman. We're born through the womb of a woman. That's how we all got here, right? We came through birth. We have this sickness, aging, and death. We have this impermanent body that arises, changes, fades away. We came into the world through an egg, a sperm, and a consciousness coming together. God is a formless being that wasn't born through the womb of a woman. So to us, if we thought about ourselves as being a God, in my opinion, this would be one's own ego and one's own arrogance. God is around us at all times. Like, he's always present. He may not show you that he's present, but he's all-knowing, all-powerful. He's everywhere at all times. And he is able to understand, and he already understands everything that's going to happen long into the future. But that's not to say that we are God or that we are creating our own destiny. Creating our own destiny could almost be looked at as, okay, we create the results of our own life. But when we put in that word destiny, it almost sounds like everything's pre-programmed. And if an individual thought that everything's pre-programmed, well, why would I do anything to cultivate wisdom now and make wise decisions if everything's already laid out for me? That is like, in my opinion, a defeating mindset. It's a defeating perspective of, well, everything's going to happen the way it's going to happen regardless. So no matter what I do, no matter what I say, no matter what decisions I make, I'm going to live that particular life. That's my destiny. And I have no ability to make anything better or change anything. And in my opinion, this is like a self-defeating perspective, because it puts you in a position where you're not cultivating wisdom and you're not making decisions that would lead to wholesome results, because an individual thinks everything is already laid out for them. Or if an individual thought that God had laid out everything for them, and now I've got to live up to what God wants, this is like somebody has expectations of you and you're adopting those expectations, and now you're taking on those cravings, desires, attachments of somebody else. And this is not the truth, that you're trying to eliminate your own cravings, desires, attachments, wants, and expectations. The last thing you're interested in doing is adopting somebody else's, whether it's your parents or your children or your life partner, your boss, or anybody. You're not interested in adopting anybody else's cravings. And God doesn't have these cravings. God doesn't have these expectations of us. But if somebody's taught that way, they might feel like it's fate or destiny, or if it's God's plan, and now you've got to live up to that. You might be craving to figure that out if somebody was taught that way. So I don't suggest that that perspective is going to lead to a healthy understanding, because it's going to promote ego and arrogance in the mind, and it's going to defeat an individual from realizing that they need to cultivate wisdom now in the present moment, make wiser decisions to produce improved results in their life.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, you're very welcome. It looks like Marcy has her hand up. If you'd like to ask your questions, Marcy, you're welcome to.
There we go. Thank you, Teacher David. Thank you, Chrissy, for sharing your information. That was helpful. Teacher David, so I have, upon reflection and trying to reestablish a wholesome relationship with God, there was times in my childhood, and not so much in my adulthood, but more in my childhood, where I would be presented in a situation and I would have this almost like this intense kind of, not even intense. I wouldn't use the word intense, because it wasn't intense. It was more like we'll say like a gentle nudge or something. And in my mind, I would say it would be like, almost like, if you do this, it's gonna result in something. I would always kind of step back. It was almost like this time in my life where I was almost, kind of being directed. And, obviously, you can't tell me, but would I be incorrect in thinking that these were moments where God was kind of maybe providing me some guidance? I'm just trying to reflect and seeing if maybe I've had some kind of interaction with him. That would be my question.
Yeah, from my experience, God, shows up and essentially gives you this fatherly advice. It's not forceful. It's not controlling. It's not demanding. It's just, hey, this is what's wise, or this is what would be wise. And then from there, you need to be able to reflect on that and figure it out for yourself. And if you choose to go in that direction, you will see that it will work. But if you choose not to go in that direction, there's no punishment for that, right? Like, God's not forcing you to take his advice. There's times where when I was receiving guidance, I would intentionally not do what God recommended just to see what would happen. And I was independently verifying, like, yeah, he didn't punish me, but I saw the unwholesome results that I experienced as a result of not doing what he suggested, because he's suggesting things based on the natural law of karma and what would be wise and what would be unwise. But he does this in a very uplifting way. He's never demeaning. He's never controlling. He's never negative. He's never degrading you or diminishing you. It's only uplifting and positive advice, encouraging advice, only loving. So if that's what you experienced, that very well could have been from this being God.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Teacher David.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's sometimes, it's sometimes with the mind, like when you're reflecting and you're trying to verify stuff, sometimes I feel like my mind is really maybe attached to seeking clarity, so I'm trying to find that balance with it.
Sure, I understand. Looks like Chrissy has another question. Go ahead, Chrissy.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. I do have another question about how to wisely approach another situation. Having God in my life and my children's life is an important thing for me. So we have been implementing going back to church again. Excuse me. A struggle that I have been finding is the praying for things. At church and at their church school classes, David will go to classes after and we'll talk about this. And when they're praying for things, I'll ask him, well, David, did God make that happen, or did this happen? And what's being portrayed sometimes is, well, Mom, you have to believe. And I was like, well, I believe in God, but I believe that, we shouldn't be asking him for things. But I don't know if that's the best way to approach it with children, because in our church that we are having prayer requests at the end of every service. They do a prayer request, like a list of things, which is something that I've just understood in my mind. During that time, I just thank God. But I'm not sure how to approach that with the children, because it's coming off as me not believing as strongly as everyone else. And if you believe, then God will answer these things, and you're just not believing enough. So therefore, that's why it's not happening.
Yeah. So I teach my son not to believe anything, including me. So if my son said to me, like, well, Dad, you just don't believe. And I was like, yeah, I don't believe anything. And then I would say, instead of saying I believe in God, I would say, I know that God exists 100%. And I know that, and my son knows that too, because my son has had experiences independent of me, where he was able to confirm God's existence as well. So he knows that Dad doesn't believe anything. So as soon as you say, well, I believe in God, then you're showing and exposing that, yeah, I do have beliefs. You would like to, if you don't have this right now, you would like to get to the point where you know that God exists. And if somebody says, oh, you don't believe in God. I'll say, yep, I sure don't. I don't believe in God whatsoever, but I know with 100% certainty that he exists. And then someone's like, oh, okay. Because with belief, you don't know what's true or false, right? But if you know with 100% certainty that God exists based on certain experiences, then you know that to be the truth. So the things that you did with your son, like, who created that for you? Was it you or was it God? That's really wise, because I think I've shared the story with you that at one time my son went to a Christian school for 5 years. I didn't even know it was a Christian school. Not that I would have made any difference of decision based on it being a Christian school, but it wasn't apparent that this was a Christian school. Most schools, they have crosses in their logo and stuff like this. Like, you would know that it's a Christian school, but this school, it wasn't clear and obvious. I didn't know for 5 years that he was in a Christian school. And the way that I found out is one time he came home and he said, I am in the habit of saying, how was your day at school? And in second grade, he said, oh, it was great. We went to church today. And I said, oh, that's great. Did you guys take a field trip and go to a church? He said, no, we have a church right at school. We went right to the church at the school. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know you guys had a church at school. He was like, yeah. And I was like, all right, well, what did they teach you? And he was like, oh, well, I learned that whenever I have a problem, God's going to come fix it for me. Jesus is going to come fix it as soon as I have a problem. And I was like, oh, okay, so that's what they taught you, huh? And I was like, is that true reality? And he says, I don't know. He said, that's what they taught me. And I said, well, you used to have trouble with your mom talking harsh and aggressive, and you guys had a difficult relationship. But now that's not the case. You guys have a really wonderful relationship. Who solved that problem for you? Was it Jesus or was it God? He said, no, it wasn't either one of them. I said, well, who solved that problem? He said, I solved it. And I was like, how did you solve it? He said, well, I cultivated wisdom and I started treating mom better. And then she started treating me better. And I was like, all right, so does God and Jesus solve your problems or do you solve them? He said, I solve them. So I said, okay, so now you see true reality that Jesus and God doesn't solve your problems. So you can do that kind of thing. You can say, David, who bought you that PlayStation, or who bought you that Nintendo Switch, or who bought you those shoes, or how did you get those glasses that you wear? How did you get those blankets on your bed? How did you get that food? Well, mom bought that, dad bought that, grandma bought that, Okay, so these things that are coming into your life, can you show me one thing that God got you? And it's not that God's a bad person or a bad being, right? It's just that God isn't a genie in a bottle. That's not the way God functions. So you might need to help them be able to see that. And maybe you can through asking them wise questions like I did with my son. Maybe you're a little bit more challenged. It might take more than one time because you've got these other influences in his life that are teaching him to believe and believe and believe. For me, it was just his teachers that were teaching him these things. And I was able to very easily step in and help him. And I caught it very early when he had just went to church that day. In your situation, your son's been growing up this way for a really long time. He's got grandma and grandpa, maybe. He's got dad. He's got teachers. He's got all these people who are sharing things with him that are opposite of what you're sharing. So it might take you more than one conversation for him to be able to see this. And then ultimately, if you have a craving for him to see it, you're going to need to let that go, that ultimately he might not be ready to see that truth right now, but maybe he will at some point in the future. So you'll need to be patient with that and realize that your goal isn't to try to force him to understand what you understand, but where you can, if you can guide him and you can help him, that's great. But if he's not able to see it or understand it, then that's okay too. And you just move on because, you need to eliminate any of your cravings or desires or attachments.
Thank you. Can I ask one other question also?
Sure. You're welcome to ask as many as you like.
Okay. There's also a habit in our family or to give thanks before we eat, to give thanks to God for the food. So it's understood that's a misunderstanding also. God didn't make the food, I made the food.
Mm-hmm. Mom's not getting the credit, right?
So, huh?
Mom's not getting the credit.
but there's also a desire for the importance of giving God thanks and to teach the God to give thanks. So my mind is still confused there.
What I would do, if you guys like praying as a family at your meal, what I would do is say the things that I shared, like, yes, we believe in you, you're welcome to give us guidance in our life. Thank you for being part of our life, rather than thanking you for this thing. Because if you're thanking him for this thing, that's reinforcing to David and your children that God provides us things, right? So if they're doing that each meal, then that's reinforcing that misperception. So what you can do is still pray if that's what you guys enjoy doing and you like doing, but adjust your prayer where you're not thanking him for things, but you're thanking him for being part of your life and having a relationship and those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Looks like Marcy has another question as well. We'll go to Marcy. I see that we have questions online as well through Facebook and YouTube. I'll get to you guys in a moment, but thought I would just answer the ones here in Zoom first. Go ahead, Marcy.
Thank you, Teacher David. So God created this world that we live in and these natural laws of existence. Is that a correct understanding?
This is similar to a question that's coming in on YouTube from Tonka, where Tonka's asking, did God create the natural law of karma? Did God create that? You won't see in the teachings of the Buddha where the Buddha says that, right? The Buddha is not saying that. But in my opinion, if we think about God as being the creator of the world or creator of the universe, which the Buddha references at one point in his teachings, he talks about this great Brahma as being the creator. And that's where he leaves it. In my opinion, if God is the creator, then any of these natural laws that we experience and that we're learning as part of this path, this is the creation of God. That's the way that I think of it, because he created the world. But you won't see that the Buddha explicitly says it in that way.
So would it be an acceptable thing to thank God for creating this world and this opportunity to reach enlightenment?
Sure. Yeah, you could think of it that way. God helped me a tremendous amount on this path. So there's times when I pray, what I pray nowadays is I pray the Lord's Prayer. But when I sometimes I'm just around and realizing how peaceful the mind is and how wonderful life is, sometimes I just look up and I say, God, thank you so much for all your guidance. Thank you for everything you've done for my life. Thank you for helping me in this journey, because he gave me advice and gave me help along the way. And I'm very grateful for that, to be able to experience what this human state can really be. So you could definitely do that. But just understand that any work that needs to be done, you need to do that work, that it's not God that's doing that work.
Thank you, Teacher David.
You're welcome.
That helps a great deal.
Sure. So there we just talked about Tonka's first question. And then she has this other question. Why did the Buddha say both exist and does not exist? We can't exist and do not exist at the same time, can we? So what you'll see in the Buddha's teachings when you go through them is you'll see that he's very thorough in the way that he teaches. He rules out all possibilities, or he'll rule in all possibilities. That when an individual has taught, like the Buddha's teaching, something so impactful that is going to be spread all throughout humanity, and then they die, they need to be sure that they don't leave any wiggle room for somebody to come in and slip something into their teachings that isn't actually their teachings. So what you'll see the way that the Buddha teaches is he teaches so thoroughly that he'll rule out all possibilities, or he'll rule in all possibilities by doing things like this. So you're right, you can't both exist and not exist at the same time. It's not possible, but this is one of the ways that the Buddha teaches in a way to rule out all possibilities so that in the future, after he's dead, somebody can't slip something in. So if he didn't include this, then maybe someone says, well, the Buddha both exists and he doesn't exist. And they kind of slip this in. But the Buddha like ruled that out by being very thorough in the way that he describes his teachings. So that's why you'll see a Buddha teach in that way. We have some questions on Facebook from Mayu Lee. She says, although Buddha did not declare that there's a soul or not, but based on his teaching on rebirth, can we say that there is no soul, correct? I would say that would be unwise to say that, because with the Buddha saying and leaving it as an undeclared teaching, I would suggest that you leave it that way. By saying and confirming and saying that there is no soul, you would need to have independently verifiable evidence in order to prove that, if you're speaking the truth. And that's what the Buddha is guiding you to do, is to be able to speak the truth. And in order to speak the truth, it needs to be independently verifiable truth. And that's why, like, even now, when you hear me talking about the Buddha related to his teachings and God about the natural law of karma, I say very clearly, I say, the Buddha did not explicitly say that God created the natural law of karma. This is what the Buddha said, that God is the creator, and this is what I'm saying. And I'm just saying that very clear so that you can see the truth there, and then you can decide for yourself. But on something like this, I don't suggest that you say that there is no soul, because you're going to need to have independently verifiable evidence to prove that. And that would be you speaking the truth. And since the Buddha left it as an undeclared teaching, I would encourage you to also consider that just to be undeclared, and that there isn't declaring that there is a soul, but there isn't declaration that there isn't a soul either. And the Buddha would have done that for a specific purpose, and you may or may not know why he actually did that, but it helps you to be able to then practice the universal truth of impermanence and understand the cycle of rebirth. Because if there is a soul, that conflicts with the universal truth of impermanence and the cycle of rebirth. And if there isn't a soul, well, the Buddha left that as an undeclared teaching for a reason, and we don't necessarily know why. So it's wise to just understand that it's undeclared rather than you declaring that there isn't a soul. Then Mayu Lee has another question here too. She says, some of people around me live their life to God in prayer on a daily basis. So leave their life to God in prayer on a daily basis. But I know that is ourselves that cause our own discontentedness, and only we can change that. Sometimes it was recommended to me to pray. I understand that they mean well. How can I respond to that without hurting their feelings? Well, it's important to understand that no matter what you say, you can't hurt somebody else's feelings, that it's their own cravings, desires, attachments that's causing their painful feelings, not you. But I understand what you're trying to do is say something in a way that their craving doesn't get triggered, so that then they experience painful feelings. They think that that's coming from you, and then they push you to the side. So somebody recommends to me to pray, and I don't pray, even though I do pray. But if I didn't pray and someone's like, oh, you should pray, you know, God's there for you, you should believe in God and you should pray, I would say, oh, thank you for your kind words. I appreciate your kindness, or I appreciate your thoughtfulness, or I appreciate your care. I would just say like that, because that's essentially what they're doing, is they have care, they have kindness, they have this thoughtfulness that they're sharing with you, and you would like to acknowledge that and just say, oh, I appreciate your care, or I appreciate your thoughtfulness, or I appreciate your kindness, or I appreciate your kind words, or that's so thoughtful of you to think of me in that way. Thank you so much for suggesting that, right? And that's all you can say, because you're acknowledging their wholesome quality there of having care and kindness towards you. And that would be a wise way for you to potentially respond to that. And then they feel like, okay, this person got the message, which is they're caring for you and they have the kindness towards you, and you're receiving that and acknowledging that and showing your appreciation for it. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So what I'll do is just end class by thanking all of you for joining for today's class. And if you haven't read this particular chapter, you might decide to read it. This book is available for you on buddhadailywisdom.com. You can download it for free. You can take it and go print it, or you can get printed versions on Amazon, or you can get them here at the temple in Chiang Mai if you're here and you'd like to pick up a copy. So it would be really wise to go through, because in the book I lay it out and word it in a way that you can understand it through written format. Also, here at the end of class, I would like to remind you about our future classes and invite you to attend. That next Sunday, I'm going to be in chapter 19, which is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where you're going to learn about the life story of the Buddha and what motivated him to go on this journey to enlightenment, and also helping you to understand this very difficult, challenging time in your life where either you or the people around you are sick or aging or experiencing death. These tend to be three things that the human mind really struggles with and has a lot of difficulties with. So not only am I going to share with you the life story of the Buddha, but I'm going to help you with teachings to understand how to deal with these particular experiences when you or the people around you are experiencing sickness, aging, or death. So you can either attend live, either 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. Thai time for next Sunday, or you can watch the replay and the recording. And then this Wednesday, I'm going to be doing breathing mindfulness meditation, helping you guys through a guided meditation, and then opening up to any and all questions that you guys might have. And again, I'm doing that at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Thai time. You're always welcome to join at any of those times. So thank you all for attending class. Thank you for your determination to learn and practice. As you have questions and you would like to talk about things, you're always welcome to reach out through asking questions in class, through posting in the Facebook group, through sending private messages, or scheduling personal guidance. Perhaps we'll see you guys in one of these future classes. We'll see you next time. Sawadee ka.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.